components, and we learnt about the mount in class, how to handle them, right? So in class components, we discussed the difference between pure and impure. What is a pure component? A pure component will load only when any content is modified, right? So impure component loads every time, even when the content is not modified, all right? So how to define state? We don't have any hooks here. Internally state is available, we can use it. How to, how to write mount and unmount? Mount and unmount is defined by using methods, life cycle methods. We have life cycle methods called component, did mount, and component did unmount. Right? These are differences. Generally, mount and unmount is maintained in function component by using what? By using use effect. Here we have separate methods. Next, we discussed about the change in style binding is same, class binding is same, data binding is same. There is no change in that. Event binding, some difference we learned. What is event binding difference is, if events are using state, you must bind them with the class, otherwise they cannot work. How to bind? By using the method called bind. Without the method bind also we can do by making the event to return a function. So that is required specially when you are writing events in class. And events in class will not point towards a function, they point towards methods. All these examples we learned in our previous session. Now, after understanding this, now we need to know how the communication with API happens here. Connecting with API in class component. Connecting with the API in class component. So how you can connect and how you can define. Right. So connecting with API in class component. So here you can use all the techniques that you have learned in your function component. Tell me in this what methods we learned in function. To connect with API, what techniques we use? We used XML, HTTP. We used fetch, jQuery, Ajax, Axios. Is there any kind of problem in using them in class? XML, HTTP, is it a function? Is it an object? We need to create an object for XML, HTTP. Through that object, we have to access. Is it possible? Previously, how we created var HTTP, new XML HTTP request. Is it possible to declare variable in a class? No. Then how you will do it? You can have a variable in a method in a class, not directly as class member. So this is possible. How it is possible? You can write one method. In that method, you can create an object. Through that object, you can access. So it is possible to use all the techniques that we learned. We can use XML, HTTP and all. That means how do we do? Generally, to access data from any API, we can first, what we can do is we can create a simple method. Here, if I say var HTTP, it is not allowed because variables are not allowed. Then what we do, we write a method called load data. This method will have HTTP. So it can access the data. So that means new XML, HTTP request object. We can access that and you can manage. Now, at the time of loading the component, you can load the data. That means what you do, component, component did mount. On component did mount, you can call the method. What is the method? This dot load data. So it is possible. We can even use a fetch method here. Am I right? Fetch promise. We can use Axios here. We can use Axios and configure the method here. So all the techniques that you have learned will work here. There is no problem. So connecting with API, you can use all techniques that you implemented, that you implemented for function components. You can use all techniques that you implemented for function components. XML, HTTP request, fetch, jQuery, AJAX methods, and Axios. You can use all of them. There is no change. So you can use all the techniques and handle them. Only the point is whatever data comes, you have to store in a state and use it. Let's see one small example. So because you already learned these examples in function components, first suppose I want to access data from fake store and we want to use it. Then in the state, we are defining, in the state, we are configuring categories. Categories is an array. And we are configuring products. Products is also an array. So two are there. One is categories, another one products. Okay. Now here on component mount, so we can write separate methods. First, load categories is a method of class. we cannot have functions. We have to define method. It can use Axios, Axios.get, get from where https colon fakestore.api.com slash what products, products slash what categories. Dot then we will get the response and we will set the response data. So this dot, what it is, set state. Into the state, we have what categories. Into the categories, we will assign the response dot data. That means into the categories, we are sending the response data. Categories is an array. We are assigning the response data into the categories array. Okay. Now we want to display the categories at the mount phase. Component did mount. We have to access this dot load categories. That method will execute. Now we want to display all the categories. Then we will put a drop down. I'll just put a heading fake store and we will put a drop down. And in this, we are adding this dot state dot what categories. You have to map, read every category and print an option for that. And every option will have a key. The key will be what category. And we will display the category in that. Okay, this is the categories. We are reading all the categories and displaying the categories. It's working same. So whatever techniques you have used in your function components, the same you can implement. So I am not giving any logic here, just simple. What are the option? Now, actually, this is the simple Axios request. You can try other requests also same. And products also same. No need to explain that. You add that products also and define. So you can try all the examples that you have learned in your function component, same as this. Just here we need to understand the difference. What is the difference? Now, one important question is that the question is generally, what is the job of constructor? Constructor purpose is to create an instance of class. So constructor will execute automatically for every object. Then in some experience interviews, they ask, then why can't we call this method in the constructor? Why to write a separate mount event, mount method? So first constructor will create an object. While creating object, it will allocate memory. So after that, it will load the component. Before loading the component, at the time of creating component only, memory is allocated. Then why don't you call the methods in the constructor? Why you are writing a separate component mount event? Question understood? Component mount also automatically executes. But before the component mount, the component is created. So both are executed automatically. That means there is a slight difference. While creating, memory is allocated. After creating, we are executing a function. While creating itself, if memory is allocated, why can't you load it? Observe carefully. This load categories, I will not write in the mount phase. You see, it is not loading anything. I will write in the constructor. Where is this constructor? In the constructor, I will call that. In the constructor, when I call that, you can see it is working. That is the reason in interviews they ask, it will work when you call in a constructor. Then why you don't call in a constructor? Why you write in a mount phase only? It is not recommended to write in constructor. If there is a constructor, then why you need a mount phase again? That is the question asked in interviews. Because generally sometimes people answer like, what is mount phase? Then they will say that at the time of loading component, some actions I want, then I am giving to mount. Then interviewer will ask, then you can give it to constructor also. Because before loading, constructor is going to allocate memory. There also you can define functions. It will work. It is working, you can see. Then what is the problem? Why it is not recommended is, when state is created at the time of creating the component. Means in the constructor we written, in the constructor if you written, the state is created at the time of creating component. So at the time of creating state, you cannot assign anything to state. Generally, where you are assigning categories, categories are assigned to state, and the state will not allow to assign. Actually, it is working, but it is not recommended to assign value into state at the time of creating the state. You can check the problem. We will right click, inspect, and go to console. When we go to console, there is an error. And what is the error? You can see it is an error. Cannot call set state in a component that is not yet mounted. So set state must be called only after mount. Remember, you can call. I'm calling already. It's working also. But they say that this might indicate a bug in your app. What is meant by bug? What is difference between error and bug? Bug and error are same. Rectification of error. Identifying is error. Rectification is solving error. Bug. What is debugging then? What is debugging? Debugging is fixing bug. Right? What is bug? What is error? Error is an issue that comes at compile time. Bug comes at runtime. Errors will come at compile time, and bugs will come at runtime. That means bug means due to bug, your application will not stop. Your application will compile successfully, run successfully, but at certain stages it may fail. Every time it will not fail. At some stages it may fail. Then that is called as bug. Suppose you designed a button. Sometimes it is working and sometimes it is not working. That is not error. That is a bug. We need to fix that bug. Error set compile time, bug set runtime. Right? So technically what happens is, as of now, there is no problem. In future, it may create a problem. That is the point. So here the concept is, so create a method create a method in class where you can configure the logic for communication with API. Configure the logic for communication with API. So you can call the method on specific event or component did mount. Or component did mount. So you can call the method on specific event or component did mount. So in the questions, why can't we call the methods and assign values into state while creating object for class? So that means that is in constructor. Why can't we call the methods and assign value into state while creating object for class? So what is answer? What is the answer? The answer is you cannot set state before a component is mounted, right? So you cannot set state before a component is mounted. Component is mounted. Constructor executes before component is mounted. Hence, it is not, hence it leads to bug. If you try to set state in constructor, it leads to bug if you try to set state in constructor. Remember, if you are doing any another work other than setting state, you can do in constructor. So anything related to set state, you cannot. So accessing data from API and using it is nothing special. So same, some small difference you need to understand. And usually the right way is this. You call on component mount. That is the right way to access and use it. That is the right way of accessing the data, right? It will work, but it will lead to bug. This is example. I'm not giving any complex one because you can try all other examples. So that is the difference between class and function for API. What about form? That means forms and validations in a class component. How you done that in function components? By using formic. And how formic works? You learned that formic can use several techniques. In that, one is by using use formic hook. They will not work here. You cannot use formic. Last technique you learned in formic is formic components. You remembered formic components. We can use those formic components. You cannot use formic. That means, so here the point is, if you are using forms of HTML directly in class component, then you have to implement by using methods and event binding. By using methods and event binding. If you are using forms of HTML directly, then you have to depend on component using methods and event binding. Methods and event binding means what? On change and all. For example, suppose here, let's do another one. Suppose we want to get the details here. We are creating a heading. So register user. We have a form and some form, data list, data term, username, and text box. Input type is text. And age, some input type text, or number or anything. Drop downs, everything same. Here we put a button, type as submit, and value as register or submit I am giving. Now I need to collect the data from the form and I need to handle it. So I need to access the data from form and use it. Then same technique what we have to do here in the state, we need to create an username which is string type. We need to create age, that is a number type. Now what we have to do, two methods we have to write. One is handle name change, not functions, methods. Right here, event arguments all are same. We have to set this dot set state. In this, we have to object. What is it? Username. E dot target dot value. And what about age? Otherwise, age will reset again. Age will be this dot state dot age. That's how we do. And here, another one. So handle age change. Handle age change. In that same, this dot set state and username, it will actually come from this dot state dot username. And age will come from e dot target dot value. And one more point here, we need to write handle submit. On handle submit, we have to just log console.log this dot state dot username. So username and age. Suppose I am just using a simple expression like name is equal to this dot state dot username, and age is equal to, so this dot state dot age. Like this we need to manage, and you need to write the options. What is it? On change, handle this dot, handle name change, and this one also on change. On change this dot handle age change, and form on submit. On submit this dot handle submit. Now important is here all these three events are using state. If all the three events are using state in the constructor, you have to bind them. Otherwise, they will fail. For example, you see now, I am trying to type something, it will fail. Why it will fail? Because events cannot use state. Already we learned that. So what we have to do? This dot handle name change is equal to this dot handle name change dot bind with what? This. Similarly, this dot handle age change, this dot handle age change dot bind with this. This dot handle submit is equal to this dot handle submit dot bind dot this. These all mandatory. So now you can see that I am entering the data here, username and age, and submit, then it will collect that. Of course, it is submitting the form. It is submitting the form. So you can prevent the default. What we have to do? Here we have to use not age change on submit. On submit, e dot, what it is? Here also we access the event argument. Yeah. So here we have to write e dot prevent default. Prevent default is the method. Otherwise, by default, submit action will work and your page will post. You cannot see the data that you posted. So this is what we are giving. Submit, it will get that and show. Validations and other things, you write like methods. So you cannot write like functions. So this is without any third party. If you are dealing, you have to depend on methods and event binding. So this is example for that. Register.jsx. This is example. Okay. If you are using third party, that means the next point is if you are using any third party library, then make sure that you are not using the hooks of third party. The hooks of third party. You can implement and use only components of third party. Third party. Remember, here if anybody asked you like, I have a function component called login. Login is a function component. This is returning some markup. That means this login is a component. Now we have a class component home. This extends react.component. is it possible to access that login here? Means my question is it possible to access a function component and use it in class component? We can use it. Why? Because generally, where you access a component in another component, we have a render method. Now. This render method is going to return. We learned that class will return by using which method? Render. So render is a method. In a method, you can call a function. Na? Function cannot be a class member, but it can be a member of a method. Now, based on this, they will ask you one question. That means this is possible. We can access a function component in class. Why? Because usually we access inside the render method. Based on this, they will ask a question. Then why use formic like hooks? We cannot use. Suppose I am writing a method. That means I am writing some method. I am writing some method. In this method, we can call use formic. Na? Can we call? Because you are saying that functions are not accessible directly as class member, they are accessible as a member of method. Then if I access use formic inside a method, it will work. It will work. What do you say? You remember the rules of hooks? See, you written rules for hooks. Na? I given some hooks related rules. See the hooks related rules you written. Hooks related some rules. We learned about hooks concept. Na? Hooks related rules are there with you in your note. In those rules, what are the rules we mentioned? What are the rules we mentioned? Hooks related rules. We learned that hook is a function. You cannot access in class components. And one more, why you cannot access in class components? For that reason is there. One more point is there. You see the point. I given a point that hooks can be accessed at higher level only. You cannot access a hook inside any function. Is that point there? You cannot access hook inside any methods, inside any functions. You can access hook only individual. Remember, these all types of questions are very popular in interviews. Generally, if you don't concentrate on those minor points, remember I give an FAQ for every topic. So you people make a list of all those FAQs from begin to end in one document separately. That becomes your interview questions and answers. And remember, majority interviews will not ask anything outside that. What you learned, only those. But sometimes you may not recall immediately. Once go through every point, we learned rules of component, we learned rules of JSX, we learned rules of hooks. Questions will be related to them. So you need to know. So why you cannot access a hook inside method? You cannot access hook inside method because hooks are not accessible in any method. They are accessible only at higher level. Hooks are not accessible inside functions or inside methods. So you can implement using only components. You can implement only components. That means if they have ready-made components, you can implement, but hooks you cannot. That is the reason every third party is not suitable. Only the third party that provides components is suitable. For example, you learned React hook form. React hook form is completely hooks only. You can't use the third party in class. So if they provide components, you can use them. So how to handle that? Let's see. This is one example. This example is without here I am not defining any state without any third party. I will delete all this, handle, submit, and everything. Okay. Delete all this form on submit and all. Okay. Actually, now I have to delete everything because now if I want to use formic here, use formic will not work. It's not possible to use formic. Then how do you do? You have to import. You have to import the formic components. Formic components like we have formic, we have form, we have field, we have error messages. These you have to implement. If you try to use formic, it will not work. Suppose, let's say I am trying to use formic hook. Okay, I am trying to call, suppose a property called formic is equal to use formic. Here I am defining some values. That means I am writing formic is equal to use formic. It's a property. And this is a hook actually. So we are trying to use that hook. It's not possible. Observe invalid hook call. Hooks can be called inside of a body of a function component. Right? Inside the body of a function component. So you might be breaking the rules of hooks. You might be breaking the rules of hooks because in the rules of hooks already I mentioned the rule that you cannot call inside the body of a class. You can call inside the body of only a function. It is not possible to do that. So then what we have to do? So we need to define like this. So no use formic. You cannot use formic. Then how to write? Already we discussed. We use what? Formic. So, okay. So we need to define formic. We are using formic. And you know how to write the formic. Formic have what? Initial values. Initial values, it is an object which contains username and which contains age. Next, formic have on submit. On submit is what? On submit, it will collect the values. That means user details, and we will submit the user details. Console.log, what is it? User. That user details we will submit on log. Later we can post. If you want to handle validation, if you want to handle the validation on validation, so here we have validate schema, validation schema. Validation schema uses what? Yup. Am I right? For that, you have to import the yapna. So import asterisk as yup from what? Yup. So this is the library we need to import. Now you see here we have to access yup dot what? Object. Yup object. It requires a field name. Field name is what? Username. So it is yup dot data type is string. And after that, it is what? Required. So some name required something. After that, min. So min is some 4 and name too short like this we are giving. These are the validations, everything you define. Remember, you cannot use formic. You have to design the formic. And inside the formic, we have a form, and form have fields. Data list, data term, username. And how to design a form field? By using field. This field should have a type. Field type is what? Text. This name is for user name. That's it. And we want a error message. So text danger and error message component is there. Error message. Error message for which field? Name. Name is what? User name. And the same thing you need to define for age. So we have a age and the data definition. We have a field. The field type is number or something. And name is what? Age. And we need a button here. Button type as submit and submit. Okay. Now this is the formic you have to deal with inside this. Now it is ready. You entered some data and you entered some age and submit, then it will submit the data. You are not entering anything, then name is required. You are entering some name and it will be like, so too short, now it is fine. So it is just all the options working fine. Only the point you cannot use hooks. So you have to choose a third party which is not having hooks. Without hooks, ready-made components are provided, then you can implement. Hooks related any library will not work in class. That you have to avoid. So that is what you need to do while working with the form. So this is another example here. Only components of third party. So here the question is, if a component is designed as function, is it accessible in class component? If a component is designed as function, is it accessible in class component? What do you say? Already we learned. So already we discussed that it is possible. So you can access class components, you can access function components. Can you access a function class in function component? Can you access a class component in a function component? You can access. You can create an object of class in a function. You can access. There is no problem. That means both will work vice versa. Function class can be accessed in a function. Means we are not saying that we will write a class in a function. We are accessing a object of class inside the function. That is possible, right? So the example is this. So you can use formic components. So we have formic, we have form, we have a field error messages. You can use this. So you can implement yup for validations using validation schema. Using validation schema. So example is this one. Same register.jsx. So this is example. So whatever you learned in functions, we are trying the same in class, but lot of variations are there. We have to just know them. Because earlier, now people used to ask like, sir, what about use context? What about use reducer? They don't have them. That is the reason they have to depend on more third